I want to thank everybody for joining us this morning. So far, we've got about 28 people online. That's great. I'm glad to see it. Sean and I are going to be talking about some risk management. There's 3 topics. We were going to include solar panels, but it looks like we've got somebody who's going to be talking about that next month. So we're talking about EMD checks today. We're going to touch on challenging and rising market, the issues that we're coming up with waivers and things like that. And another interesting topic that Sean brought up, I thought it's kind of interesting to talk about, is the pitfalls of cash transactions. And I thought that's an interesting topic, because who would realize that you have some pitfalls when it comes to cash transactions? Okay. And with that, Sean, I'm going to go ahead and let you get started, and I'll just kick in every now and then.
Okay, thanks.
Sean, before you begin, could I just mention that the solar panel class next month is for Maryland elective CE credit.
Wow.
So you'll all be able to get an hour-and-a-half elective credit from Maryland on that. And Jackie Sellers and Yvonne Dierdorf are going to host that. And they'll be sending out instructions via Lone Wolf so that you guys can get the instructions. So we don't control it. It's going to be the Real Estate Commission that controls the sign-up. That's all I got. Just wanted to mention it.
Just one other thing, guys. It is going to be limited seating, so it's going to be first come, first serve. And actually, Megan already sent the link out on Sunday, and we'll be sending it out again this weekend or Monday.
Thanks, Jack.
And Jackie, with that being CE, can we still record it? Do you know? Because that would be a fantastic one to record. Not that they wouldn't get the CE, but they could see Yvonne's interpretation of the solar panels.
Yes, we're actually checking with that right now to see if they'll allow us to record it or not.
Okay, that would be great.
According to Steve Weiler, no CE classes in Maryland can be recorded. So I don't know.
Okay.
Wow.
Maybe Yvonne would do it again for us, not credit.
And she is, yeah.
It's almost like that's such a fantastic topic. I wouldn't care if I got credit if I could still hear her opinion of that. Yeah. Okay, we'll think about that when we get there.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's get started with EMDs.
Thank you. So I don't have to tell any of you guys the challenging market that we're experiencing. You're out there trying to do it harder than I am. And I know that we're having some challenges. So we'll start off, hopefully everybody is starting to season into this new form, 2-year-old form now, that the Maryland Land Title Association and Maryland Realtors got together to put together. And that is the escrow agreement. I have that. Here we go. I'll just share that on the screen for a minute so everybody can see what I'm talking about. Is everybody familiar with this form? Because I'm going to talk about the application and the why and the how, just to review it one more time. So that's the form I'm talking about. So when you have any party hold the earnest money deposit other than one of the brokers involved, or in the case of a builder, new home construction, because they are a party to the contract, we should be using that form. Some of the misunderstanding that I hear regularly from you guys practicing and trying to do this is, unfortunately, maybe it's still new enough that the understanding is not full with everyone to include the title companies sometimes, unfortunately. So let me know if that happens, and I'm happy to help you guys through it with the title companies involved. But what that form is meant to do is, it's important that the buyer and seller, and if I'm preaching to the crowd, bear with me as we work through this form, but on that form, it's important to note that the buyer and the seller are agreeing to it. Most importantly, in my opinion, is that the title company is agreeing to be bound by the terms of the Broker Act, and that is to not disperse those funds to anyone until all parties are in agreement. So technically, we need to be really careful with that form, because I can't imagine most any title company just deciding and arbitrarily returning that deposit to someone unless perhaps they were a smaller title company with less understanding and just wanted the person who wanted the check to get off their back. That would put potentially, in my opinion, the most person to be harmed by not signing that document would be a seller, where a buyer decided they were not going to perform, they asked to be released, that was in debate, and then they go and they ask for their deposit to be released. And without that form signed, although I think it would be career suicide for a title company to release it, they could release it. So it's so important that we adapt this form. A lot of thought went into it. The first year it came out, it was kind of a rough draft, not really co-authored by the Maryland Land Title Association. Then they brought those two entities together to get an understanding between the two, an agreement between the two on who would be bound by what. So that's a really important form. And I think you guys would agree, we're starting to see more deposits being held by the title company. And that's not a bad idea. It's one that we're investigating a little bit and looking at some of our partners and the methods that they have put in place for security for these deposits. So that's an evolving process. But it's important to get that form signed in all cases where somebody other than one of the brokers holds it. And as we talk about deposits too, it's worth noting that these days, a lot of the buyer clients are submitting larger deposits in an effort to hopefully gain favor in their offer versus some of the others, to look more committed to the transaction, to be more beneficial to the seller. Well, again, until everybody agrees, those funds aren't going anywhere, but they're tied up from the buyer having them. What's a good thing to keep in mind is if you're working with a buyer who is depositing a larger earnest money, you may want to, as a course of action, just go with suggesting that the title company hold that deposit anyway. Because if you don't, then you've got that extra step to keep in mind as you get closer to settlement, to remember to ask Michelle in accounting to give you the overage check to take back to closing, because you may not be gathering enough commission dollars from the transaction to cover what we have back here on deposit and escrow. So we owe money to the transaction. If you forget, and we all can do it, I start that line some days with forgetting things, that if we forget to do that, we are not balanced at closing, or we're delaying settlement, or we're running checks or wiring funds to the title company. So it's one extra step of hassle, quite frankly, that you might want to consider avoiding, and just starting when you have a bigger deposit check, starting with considering talking to the buyer and having the parties agree that maybe the title company will hold that from the onset. That way the funds are there, they're seasoned, they've been received safely. It has established, in my opinion, maybe one primary connection for wired funds if they're wiring on a much smaller amount than ultimately the amount that they will wire for their closing, which is another topic I could get on, but you guys all understand the caution steps to put in with wiring funds these days.
Sean, if I can just mention something in relation to that.
Sure.
Very important point. It's natural for us, and everybody on the screen probably has thought about that overage at the 11th hour. That, oh my God, I got to bring money, because RE/MAX Advantage Realty was holding the money. And there was a panicked call to Michelle 2 hours before settlement. What if Michelle is off?
Right.
Then you get accused of delaying the settlement, right? And what should be a wonderful day for everybody starts out very poorly because of that money. Very often you get title companies that'll cooperate with that and help you explain it away. But this avoids it from being on you. And that's very, very valuable in the busyness of our business. So I want to really back Sean up on that. I think it's something that we should not have to worry about, in essence. Okay, I'm back off.
Thanks, John.
We do have one question, Sean, real quick.
I saw
Sorry,
Tammy had
two of them
one,
here.
and then Wayne's popped one up. So Tammy's question is, thanks, George. Tammy's question is, as the lender, would we presume that the title company holding it is the one doing the closing? I know from, I'm going to say probably with both of our partners, yes, and I can't imagine any title company wanting to hold it without them doing the closing. Having been a past title company owner and had that been presented to me, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't want to be involved. So I would say presumption, yes, but hopefully the agent involved is going to connect you guys quickly. I try to, when I'm working on a transaction, send out an email where I electronically connect everybody so you know who you're working with. But I know that Yvonne has confirmed to me they will only hold the deposit if they're doing the closing. I'm betting I will get the same answer from RMP, but that's a very valid question. Let's see, Wayne says, okay, Wayne, your question is valid. I see. Yeah, the buyer and the seller do sign it. They are just initially agreeing to those terms. In my opinion, until the title company signs that form, it's not really, and MAR will say, well, it's not part of the contract because there's a third party not involved in the contract. And that doesn't matter to me so much as the form being executed and having that title company agree to be bound by the terms. So I hear your question, the buyer and the seller agreeing. I mean, it might actually, if it feels better to you to have the buyer and seller execute it after, well, no, I think we have to have them executed first, because like here, we will not deposit a check until we're directed to do so. And by that, we mean on that line on page 1, it says Remax Advantage. If that line is left blank, Michelle technically can't deposit those funds. So I think the function of the form has to be the buyer and the seller agreeing to it, then it being presented to the title company, who signs in 2 places in that bottom paragraph. They sign acknowledging that they agree to be bound by the terms of the Broker Act, and then they sign the final line in that bottom paragraph saying, yep, now we actually received it. And in the busyness of the business, what I see a lot of times is that's the part of the form that gets overlooked, not by intention, not by anybody meaning to not fulfill that, but everybody gets rolling, and there's the presumption that because they signed, buyer and seller signed it and title company signed in spot 1, that we're all good, but we're kind of not. If any of you have had the checklist come back and on there, it'll say copy of earnest money check if we're the listing side. We just want to see that one existed. Some of you go so far as to question the buyer broker, or we get requests to verify that we have deposited funds. And we'll cooperate with that. I just redact out our account information and send that copy along. But until that, it is on us as one of the agents involved in the transaction. It is part of your due diligence to follow up on that form. That's why you'll get that one off the missing forms list sometimes, because Jackie and the processing crew are looking to ask, did you confirm that the title company has received that? We had one just the other day where it got overlooked. And I think actually we were supposed to hold it. It was George and I were talking about it. It got overlooked and we never got the deposit. And now we have to go back after settlement and ask the buyer for the money because we never had it. So it is important when using that form. It doesn't end with buyer, seller, and title company signing at once. It is on us to go back and ask to make sure that a representative from that title company does sign that bottom line.
And I might add, one of the things we had talked about before, Sean, earlier, when this first started taking place, you had some of the smaller title companies that weren't even quite aware of this form and how it worked. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of that's disappeared. But there's still maybe a few out there.
Yeah, you're right, George. And I think that was part of the effort when they fine-tuned it last year. If you looked at an old version, it said Maryland Realtors on it. Now, when you look at it, it's got the logo for both of them on that. That was bringing the 2 entities together. And I'm hoping then that Maryland Land Title is advising all of the title agencies out there on what this form is, what to expect, what to do, who should sign it, and what it means. So if not, we can help the title companies understand it. I don't mind doing that, but I think that we are getting a little less resistance. I'm seeing less resistance. I'm seeing more, we all get busy and we forget that final step. So if you see that on your checklist, that it is not complete, go back and look at the form. What that typically means is we're asking you to verify, get that title, somebody at title to sign that they did get the funds, so we know they're on deposit. That's important, especially, I mean, it's important everywhere because it's part of our job, but if you represent a seller and maybe you didn't do that step and the buyer never deposited those funds and then bugs out on the contract and your seller said, I want to pursue the deposit, what do you say to them if you didn't verify the title company had it? That's not a position we want to be in. So I hope that makes sense. Any more questions on that form?
No? Any questions about EMDs at all?
Yeah.
No? Okay. We're
Okay.
going to move on to today's challenging market. I watched a video this morning I was on Facebook, and Ben Daniels put on something, and he talked a little bit about the waiver of appraisals and things like that. There's a lot of things that people are waiving nowadays, and just know you got to be careful with that. First of all, in my opinion, and I know Sean feels the same way, you never recommend that anybody waive anything. It's their decision. We can advise them of what other people are doing to be competitive, but we do not recommend that they waive anything because they can come after you for that. But Sean, if you want to touch on that a little bit as well.
Yeah, if any of you didn't see it on Ben's Facebook post, his Monday morning post, he had come and talked to me about it. It did not happen to him, but to an agent that he knows, where this is where they say, be careful what you write because we're not practicing law. So this market, I don't have to tell you guys, is moving so fast. It's scary. It's scary to me. It's probably scary to you guys. It's frustrating. You run that balance of trying to advocate for your client, which sometimes means it's like the days when you all had kids and you took the training wheels off the bike. You were scared to death, but you wanted them to run. You want to help your client get the house, and you know the tools other people are using to help that happen, but you're a little bit afraid to advocate or get behind that. So it is, like George said, it's about telling them some of the things that you're seeing in the industry, telling them the risk that's involved with those things, and then advising them that while you may not advocate some of these things that you think, I always say to my clients, I don't want you to call me in 5 years and go, can't sell my house now because of what you did to me 5 years ago. So just be careful, advise, and let them make their best decisions. Let them develop their own sense of risk. But that doesn't mean we don't tell them their options. And in the case that George is talking about that Ben mentioned, the agent who wrote that addendum, you really have to think about this language. I wrote one recently like this too. You have to be careful because what that agent wrote was that if, irregardless, the buyer would pay, I don't know what it was, $5,000 or $10,000 over appraised value. They didn't put a comma and then say, except if it appraises it's like not to exceed the sales price or to refer back to the conventional or VA or FHA financing addendum under the terms of the appraisal, which puts a safety net a little bit on that buyer. So in this case, they failed to put that comma up to the sales price. And even though the contract was, let's say I think Ben used an example of $430, they had put in that they would pay $10,000 over appraisal. What they meant was if it underappraised, that's not what it said. It appraised for $430. The seller said, belly up, you said $10,000 over appraisal. I'll take that $10,000 at settlement. And I would not have wanted to be that agent. How do you explain that? So that's where it's important that when you're putting words together on an addendum that doesn't exist yet, and George found some language that he shared with Alex and I, and we're going to review all of that in terms of trying to help with some basic language that talks about waiving some of these conditions of a sale. Because again, while we explain them, we don't want to advocate them. And sometimes I feel like I'm squashing some of my clients because my level for risk acceptance might be lesser than some other people. But it's about educating them, telling them what's happening in the market, telling them how other people are winning bids, and then asking them what their level of risk is. What are they willing to do, and put their head down on the pillow at night and feel like, if I get the house, great, I did my best job. If I don't get the house, great, I did my best job. I wasn't willing to go above that level of risk. And that's the conversation that I try to have. Yes, hey Tammy, yeah, please share.
Okay, so I just wanted to share, and it was funny, I just had a conversation with Linda Deere, and she said, could you please find a platform to get this out there and share it? What we're finding on the lending side is the regulators are starting to crack down on the appraisers again, because the escalations are just getting out of control yet again. We've gone through this environment back when the economy crashed, and they do have concerns that the escalations are just getting out of control. So where you may feel that the sales that you're pulling from your data are able to support the escalations as high as they're getting, the appraisers are getting pushback that they can't be as generous with the appraised values. So I just wanted to get that out there and let you know that a good tool to go ahead and use on this end, and it's really been helpful with our buyer agents, not listing agents, use the House Canary report that we have. It shows the consumer the low, the medium, and then the high value. That kind of takes a little bit off of you and gives them the information that they need so that they can make the educated decisions with how comfortable they are to go higher in escalations. But just, provide them those tools, and hopefully that'll give you a little bit of a safety net.
Tammy, thank you for that. I know you had mentioned that report before. Let me ask your opinion. I'm just asking you a question that Eric and I have been talking about recently, and that is a little bit of concern, and I don't know how you see it as a lender, where I hear you, and I'm glad. I think that we all who are sensible business people hope that the appraisers help us temper this a little bit so it doesn't turn into 2006 and 7. Do you have concerns over if enough, let's say you have a subdivision of 400 homes and 3 people within a 6-month period secure cash buyers who write an escalation clause and there's no appraisal involved, is that going to flip that area enough that we now have sales in Bright that are not substantiated? Is there some super secret tool that I don't know about that reflects? No, I don't think there is. If it's not an appraisal involved and 3 sales happen within a 6-month period that were cash, have we turned the market in that area?
I'm so happy you asked that question. Remember when we were going through the, those of you that have been around for a while, when we were going through the economic crash, we were having a lot of foreclosures and short sales. Well, it got to a point where that was tipping the scales in the wrong direction. And the appraisers were then, it took a little while to play catch up. And I believe the same with the cash buyers. They then would not allow the appraisers to use a short sale or foreclosure as a eligible comparable in their determination of value. So I think we're going to come up against the same thing. It's the same exact thing. It's just a different thing with cash buyers.
Yeah, to the other side. Okay, good.
Yeah.
I'd almost like to see that temper measure. I would favor that coming in, because I think that in some cases, in these upper end properties, especially where people are flush with cash, it could turn an area. So that good. Thank you for answering that.
Yeah, and I really highly recommend, I can't remember which agent I was on this one. It was one of our RE/MAX agents, and I couldn't believe this happened. But an appraiser went out and did an inspection at a time frame that was not able to meet with the listing agent. The listing agent did a lot of homework with comparables and interior improvements on that property. The other challenge that we're facing right now is because of the high volume in refinance and purchase transactions, we're starting across the board to get the bottom of the barrel with some appraisers. They're not as qualified. They're not in the areas. So I want you to know, as listing agents, you have direct contact with the appraisers. You have their phone number. So feel free in advance when you're scheduling the appointment, any way that you can, share the information that is important data when they're making their determination, because you really don't know what you're getting right now in quality of appraisers. And I'm shocked at what we are seeing, but this is a nice way to protect your listings and the assessed values, is do your homework and due diligence to help them.
Sean, two quick points on this. First of all, going back to the illustration you gave with Ben, we all understand that when we pick up the pen and we write an addendum, we're practicing law, right? We have to all understand that. So I think it really, if you're a person that writes a simple, there's no such thing as a simple, I take it back, right? You're writing an addenda on behalf of your buyer or your seller. You have inserted yourself into the contract. And if you made a mistake, your wording is wrong, it's not clear, that can come back and bite you. So what's our recommendation? Our recommendation is, I know that you are apt to do this anyway, all right? But if you have a sliver of a doubt in the clarity of what you're saying, you should take it to a manager before you have that submitted. Just get a second opinion on that, right? Two opinions and schooled opinions are important. It's probably not it's not entirely preventable, but you know, if the wrath of God means something, it is writing a dangerous addendum. The second piece of news is on the good side. I happened to attend Lawrence Young, the economist for NAR, did a wonderful presentation last week, courtesy of Shirley Matlock for the HCAR group. And one of the predictions is that by the end of the year, the appreciation rates in Maryland, which were roughly 11% next year, will level out at about 5.5 or 6%. So the values are not going to be, according to NAR, as predictably escalating as they have been. That's kind of interesting from an appraisal point of view. It's also interesting in terms of some relief about recommending the trends to your buyers and sellers. Let's see if that comes through. We'll have a better idea of what that looks like probably at the end of the summer. But I think there's a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel in terms of the very inflated amount of appreciation that we're operating under right now. So I just wanted to make that public since we have a good crowd on this thing. Thank you.
Thanks for
John,
sharing, John.
John, I'm glad you brought especially the information about writing the addendums, how we're not attorneys. And unfortunately, sometimes we act like it. I always like it, and I know Sean does appreciate it too, as well as anybody that's in management with our company. You coming to us first, that does make us attorneys, but I mean, Sean should probably be an attorney with all her knowledge. But just listening to what you write and seeing it, think about what you want to say. Keep it simple, stupid, but get to the point. Don't try and drag it out and talk like an attorney. I always tell agents or ask agents when they come to me, well, how does this sound? And I say to them, what are you trying to say? What are you trying to convey to the other party? What are you asking them to do? And does it say that? Does it really come across that easily to you? Because you want it to come across easily. And if you get too wordy, you screw things up. There's too much to pick apart. If it ever does end up in litigation and it's too long and drawn out, the attorneys will pick that wording apart and hold it against you. But, you know, I go to Sean a lot and try and get, you know, pass things by her as well, because she can write fantastic letters. I don't want to send everybody to Sean now. She has enough phone calls, but she's just fantastic at it. And there are others that sitting in on this conference. Jackie's down there, and I know Barbara and so many others are out there, Elaine, and now we got Ellen there in Fells Point. All you guys have the experience, and it's just hear it out, what you're trying to say, and we feed it back to you, and does it make sense to you? And keep it simple, stupid. KISS.
George, you're so right. And I thank you for the kind words, but we have amazing attorneys at our elbows and our fingertips here. We don't like to use them because they cost a lot of money, but if you get to know these guys upstairs and you like wedge a question into a friendly conversation so you're not billed for it, you do learn a lot from them. So I try to take advantage of that, you know, ask them about their dog and then throw a question in. And but anybody, nobody here's ever had a problem, but if you've ever come to me with a problem, or you may have heard me say this: what do you want the answer to be and who do we represent? Because when I ask you that, it's because, like George is saying, we have to be, and John has said, we have to be so careful with the way we word things. It may seem clear to you. Your client's relying on you, so they don't know what it says. They just think you know how to convey what they want. But the minute it gets into court or before the commission, let's face it, the adversarial party, not you, is going to look at it and twist your words into what they want it to mean to the benefit of the person who's making the complaint. So it's about really dissecting things, looking at them, and trying to really always see it from the other point of view. Like, how would somebody destroy me with this? Because that's not what I meant. But if you look at that wording, like, I know the one that Ben is referencing, they're not one of our agents, but 6, 7, 8 months from now, there will be a complaint from the Real Estate Commission from that client against this agent because they cost them unnecessarily $10,000. And the thing is, they may have been willing to do it, but they didn't have to do it. They wouldn't have had to do it if it had been written differently. They now had to do it to live up to the terms of the contract. So even though they were willing to, that's not what they will remember. They will remember that the agent harmed them. So in our good intentions, sometimes we just really always look at it. And Joe Driver has said this a lot. Think about how this is going to play out in front of a judge. Just when you write something and do something, despite your intentions, think about how the other side would try to cream you on these words if they feel that they were harmed. It shouldn't be adversarial, but when it gets ugly, we all know it gets ugly. Good times.
Yes, yes. And the other thing and this is one of my pet peeves, and it's just an opinion. I know more and more we're using the as is addendum, and I can understand why. It's much more advantageous when you're submitting an offer. It looks better, but just know that there are, even at that, there's limitations in there, because unlike the regular inspection addendums, it doesn't give you that back and forth time frames. You got one time frame in there that you have the right to get out of that contract. You don't have. The seller doesn't have 5 days to think about it. The buyer doesn't have 2 days to respond, and so forth. Just be aware of that, because some people will still think that if I'm in negotiation and it goes beyond that period, I'm okay. You've lost your opportunity to cancel the contract if you go beyond that date.
Very true. And if you're writing offers down in any place, and I see this sometimes where agents in PG or Montgomery County will say, seller will not accept an MAR offer. You have to do it on GCAR forms. Be careful with those too if you don't routinely use those. It's kind of like Alice in Wonderland, the mirror is backwards. If you look at some of the GCAR addendum, and I'll give this to them, I think on some level, some of their documents are much more clear and easy to understand, honestly, than MARs. I think on some things, MAR could take a lesson, but I won't say that because I don't want to be on a committee. But you have to watch if you're using those documents, because they are backwards. The most important one being that I have witnessed, the timeframes for home inspection and property inspection notice request for repairs. Lack of answer on MAR means you don't accept and you potentially are out of the agreement. Lack of answer on GCAR means you accept what the person last said to you. And that can get you into a pickle if you're not aware of it. So it's with anything, if you're utilizing an addendum or you're in an area that you're not completely familiar with, double check yourself, be familiar, understand that there's a reason why there are GCAR documents and MAR documents. They differ, and just be careful and aware of what you're writing.
Yeah, and understand that, especially those that are working out of the Howard County area representing the listings and so forth, you're going to get agents coming up from the Montgomery County, Prince George's County area that are going to be making offers, and they're familiar with their forms, and that's what they're going to use. Make sure you read them and understand them, because just as Sean's saying, there are different ways that they're written, whether it's the Prince George's County or the GCAR, the Montgomery County addendums. Sometimes the language is different, the time frames are different. Don't assume anything. And even with all these waivers that we're talking about, remember, when we talk a lot about discussing how you write them as the buyer's representative and how you're going to submit that. But even as the listing agent, make sure you review them. And if there's anything there that you're not sure of, ask questions. Get a defined answer from the other side. Is this what their intent is? What are they prepared to do if it doesn't appraise and things like that? Read the language that's there. Just ask a lot of questions so you can best represent your client.
Tammy's got a question. Yes, Tammy, thank you. Tammy asked, can we just kind of go over being careful not to leave blanks when you're writing an offer? That can get you into trouble. It shouldn't be, but and some things, well, maybe like I routinely see, and I think you're pretty safe on this one, but like the part of the contract where it asks who's going to pay if there's any ag tax or reforestation. And routinely I see that people leave those blank. At worst case, at least write NA in there so that the seller and the buyer are both acknowledging, on some level, the seller is acknowledging that they have no knowledge that it would be subject to that. If you leave them blank, that's just one example. If you leave anything blank, there's room for misinterpretation or misunderstanding each other. If it's not applicable, put in NA or draw a line through that. It's best to make that document as complete as possible, because blank can be left open to interpretation.
Absolutely.
Any special thing you'd like to bring? I'm sorry, George.
No,
Any special thing, Tammy, you'd like to address on that? Just don't do it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just don't do it. I did see one contract had a lot of blanks, and it was part of the financial piece. It was inspection, just a couple of areas that are hot buttons that really make me nervous. And I know that's out of my lane, but I do want to make sure that everybody's protected. And when I saw that, it made me nervous.
Yeah, and it's not out of your lane actually, because yeah, I've seen those too, where some things will be left blank on the financial, on the financing addendum, and I would say don't leave those blank. Presume the highest rate that your buyer will go for and write that rate in there, because you're not committing them to a rate if you leave that blank. And if, heaven forbid, we woke up tomorrow and they said the world has come to an end, Martians have invaded, and rates are now 7, which any of us who have been around a long time would still be going, yay. But let's say that happened. If you left that blank, you didn't limit the amount that buyer, and so even if they squeak by and they can qualify without being disqualified for financing, you could have left that Pandora's box open. So just be mindful when you're writing the offers. And gosh, I know. Sometimes we're writing with 10 minutes notice and a deadline imposed 30 minutes after the open house ended. I've been in that position. It's a nauseating feeling. You're rushing. You don't like to rush. You are worried you're going to forget things. Take a minute after you put it together and go back through it, and don't leave anybody prone with a blank where you could have. Some things are less consequential, but some, like Tammy you're saying, could get people into a jackpot.
Yeah, one in particular was the lender required repairs. That
Ooh.
was blank, and that made me very nervous.
Yeah.
That's the one I was going to touch on as well. And I like all my spaces filled in. I learned that many years ago. As a young man, I remember one time I applied for a job somewhere and I left blanks on something. The guy never hired me, but he reamed me out for not filling in every space,
Mm.
and then refused to hire me. But I even, on the last page of the contract of sale, I even make sure all my broker information in there, even if the other agent doesn't supply me with the broker's license number, it's easy enough to get. If it's not on Bright MLS, which it should be, but if it's not, it's easy enough to go into DLLR and look it up. There's many things you can do, but I fill in everything, and I make sure if there's a spot, I put something in there, whether it's NA, 0, not applicable, whatever, or like Sean's saying in the agriculturally assessed property, sometimes I'll put seller if applicable, whatever. I don't put none because I want to make, whatever, but I'll put something in there so that there's a spot, or there's something for every spot.
Mhm. Yep. Yeah, like you, right. Just presume, yeah, put some answer in there. That's important. That one with lender required repairs, that could have been a sticking point. Some houses will cruise through with none, but if they see something and it turns into $1,000, are we now negotiating that after we have an agreement? Any other things you guys have come up across? Would you like to specifically touch on? I think we can all agree it is a challenging market, huh? Okay.
Yeah, don't get frustrated. I mean, just know it's a challenge. You'll survive through it. We've been through this kind of thing before years ago. You just have to keep the faith, keep a positive attitude, and just keep plowing away. It's what makes us better. Okay, I often tell my son, stress builds character. And he tells me I've got enough damn character already, Dad. Why don't we talk about the pitfalls of cash contracts? And there can be many. First of all, just confirming that they have the amount of funds needed to pay cash. How you do that, the documents we need, and so forth. Get a statement that's showing where these funds are coming from, so that you're aware of it. And just know, and if they're using, and Sean and I talked about this the other day, if they are using the fact that they're going to be drawing from an investment account or something like that, just know if your settlement is 60 days away, 90 days away, 30 days away, if that's what they're relying on and the market were to fall apart tomorrow and they lose all that money, will they still have the funds to go forward with that contract? These are questions we have to ask. And just know, you need to know that they have the funds in place.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about. I had a client that happened to right before COVID last year, and if he had settled 2 weeks later, he wouldn't have paid cash because the cash would have evaporated, like a lot of people temporarily, but we wouldn't have met closing. So I am not a big fan. And these days I know that people are putting a lot of cash down or offering to pay cash. I keep saying in joke, I think there's a black market somewhere that's giving people cash at like really high rates for short terms, and then there's going to be this big influx of refinances 60 days down the road to pay all of these sources of cash back. I don't know where this cash is coming from, but I'm not a big fan of cash because it's hard to document. It can evaporate. People can change their minds. What do you do if somebody says they're going to pay cash and then they don't? We had, I think Ben, maybe it was on his thing too, he was indicating that people, I haven't seen it, but people are writing based on the buyer telling them, I'll pay the difference in cash, but nobody's verifying the cash. And they didn't have the cash. Like, to me, it's, we had somebody here, they're no longer here. I won't say their name, but I'll use this example. About 2 or 3 years ago, they came to me and just white as a ghost, sick as could be. They had $1 million sale. They represented the buyer, and this just floored me. The buyer did not have the cash to close. It was $1 million sale. And I said, well, how did you verify the funds? Well, I didn't. You didn't? How come? Because I go to church with them and I believed them. Okay, we don't have an addendum for that one. So Did the listing agent not ask you to verify the funds either? Nope, listing agent did not ask for verification. And I said, well, that's going to be the only thing that's going to save you, because we can spread this around. And that's what I say too. My job is to take the bucket of mud that comes in my door, water it down, spread it around, and spread the blame. So we take it off of one person. So in this case, the only thing that saved our agent was the other agent didn't ask for proof of funds either. Like, so we could share the lack of accountability here. That's the word I'll use. But if you got somebody paying cash, and the more sensitive they become about, it's a red flag if somebody tells you they're paying cash and then they don't really love that you're asking them to document it. I understand maybe you get the bank statement and you redact the account number. Yeah, I get that. Don't give your account number out. There's no need for me to know that. Or it's a person who is still kind of squeamish about that. Then get something on letterhead from their bank that says they have an excess of the funds required to complete this transaction in cash. But I feel like it's really slippery to deal with cash. And I know we're all dealing with it. What do you don't turn an offer away because it's cash. But in my mind, if you're looking at 12 offers on your listing, the cash one might not always be the strongest one. The person with a good down payment that's documented, with a lender who's going to back up and vet them thoroughly, in my mind, might be the better choice than the person who says, I've capped the cash, see you in 30 days. So it's just about sensibilities, and I'm sure you all understand this, but it's the sensibility of cash is not always there, even when just because somebody tells you it's there, it's much more slippery to me than a documented mortgage.
Sean, wouldn't it be true, and George, wouldn't it be true that in the cases of buyers waiving the financial contingency, aren't they effectively saying we'll pay cash?
They're giving up the right to get out of the contract. Based on
Isn't the effective result of that, isn't it? Once the finance contingency is removed, they remove it. That they're effectively saying, I'll pay cash.
I don't know that I've worded that way, John. Because it's.
I don't know the answer to this. I'm just throwing it out.
I'm thinking out loud, and I know Sean might have some advice on this. I wouldn't quite put it that way. I would just say that they're giving up the right. The contingency is no longer valid, or they've deleted that contingency, removed that contingency. That's the best word. They've removed that contingency, and they no longer have that right to, get out of the contract. Now, Sean, you may have a different opinion about that.
Let me see if I understand like the example that you're. So John, do you mean like you have a buyer under contract and they're contingent on conventional financing, and then they remove that contingency? Is that what you mean? Or?
What happens is they submit a contract with the contingency.
Okay.
And then they counter it in order to get it by removing the contingency. Aren't they effectively saying that I may take a loan, I may not take a loan, and in the event I don't take a loan, I'll pay cash?
I think that they lose their right to take a loan at that point. And at that point, then if I were the listing agent presented with that offer, I would want documentation.
Absolutely. Okay.
Yep, that they have the cash available. And it scares me a little bit. Cash scares me because of the volatility of what can happen to it.
I'm just questioning about how removing that could be interpreted. That's all.
Yeah, I'm almost of the mind, if you're going to pay cash, the way things can happen, and like the instance I tell you about my buyer, if we hadn't wired the funds a week prior to closing to the title company and had waited till the day before, in that case, it was that specific when things went for a while that we wouldn't have settled. So in my mind, if you're a cash buyer and you've done your home inspection, if I'm accepting a cash offer, or if I'm working with a seller who's going to accept it, one of the conditions would be you wire all the funds to the title company as soon as we get through home inspection.
Right. Okay, thanks.
And also keep in mind with that, and I know Tammy and Cassie can touch on this, because they can usually qualify somebody in a pretty quick amount of time, but that commitment still has certain conditions to it. So just because they received a commitment doesn't mean that they are totally 100%, free of going forward, because you got to have a clear transferable title, make sure that happens, and plus the review of the documents at settlement. That may not seem like much, you're getting that far, but just understand that.
Mhm. True.
I don't know whether you guys want to add anything to that. She's shaking your heads, but don't know whether you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, the commitments that we're getting, we're verifying income, asset, credit documentation. We're doing our due diligence with the consumer. However, we have had title come back, and we don't know about this until we receive the title binders, that there is a title issue with our borrower that could be a hard stop. So there's just so many moving parts in the transaction, to include possible issues at the 11th hour doing a title search with the borrower, that they have liens, judgments, or something against them with other properties that don't come up on the credit report. They don't come up in anything that we find, but they do come up in title.
We had a question here from Calvin about, and this is a good question. I've been asked this one before, and we see these happening now. You know, I was joking about the pockets of money out in the world that are providing this cash. Calvin asks, any opinion on an offer you may receive as cash but using hard money lender? My opinion, it's contingent on financing. I know that we get those written all the time. I know that some of our agents represent people who, with no disrespect, well, yeah, it does sound disrespectful, who have watched the HGTV specials and now want to flip a house. And they go to this cash source who tells them, no, you can write it cash. I'm going to give you the cash. Not always. You know, it's still subject to either an appraisal or to their inspector. Anytime that cash is not in the borrower's hands today to hand over to the seller, in my opinion, that's not a cash transaction. So I think it's, if we're representing the buyer and we know that, I think we need to make it contingent on, you know, under other, you could put private lender. You don't have to say hard money lender. That can be derogatory on some level. And that's not, hard money just means like quick flip. It doesn't mean, it doesn't reflect on the buyer. It can be private lending. So that you're making the other side aware and assessing the offer that there is a tie to somebody else funding this. Just like if we have a gift letter, we have to say the gift letter applies, because that if that person decides not to, or something happens to them and they don't gift the money, if we don't have a gift letter, you haven't given a true picture. So if you have a hard money lender, I believe that we should be representing that on the offer, because it's not really cash, because it's not the buyer's cash. It's not at their fingertips and able for them to access it. There are conditions to that cash. George, you think the same? Jackie?
Yep.
Guys?
Yep. I feel the same way. Yes.
Okay. Elaine? Sorry, I'm looking for all the managers on my screen.
Everybody's shaking their head.
Everybody agrees with me, right? Okay.
There you
we're
go.
good.
Yes. Yes. Thumbs up. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And Wayne, I got your
Hard money
message.
lenders fall under like using the grant programs. You have to disclose if you're using the grant program. So in my opinion, the hard money lenders, you kind of treat it the same.
Yeah. One other thing I would like to touch on that came up at one of the meetings I had the other day here in Eldersburg is those of you that deal with the Baltimore metro area. There are some communities around that, and this deals with HOAs and covenants and restrictions. There are some communities in the Baltimore metro area that have voluntary HOAs, and I'll give you two of them. One is Academy Heights, and the Rogers Forge is the other one. Just they come top of my mind. They were both built by the same contractor back in 1951. Who would think in 1951, first of all, that you have any kind of covenants or restrictions, or even an HOA? Their HOAs there are voluntary. You don't have to belong to them. They don't have to disclose that. It's voluntary. But what people don't realize, because they don't know that market, is they do have recorded covenants and restrictions. And it's important that if you're servicing that area, you're working in that area, that you know that. And I'll give you a couple examples. Academy Heights, say, for instance, they still require slate roofs. If you have to replace that roof, it is required that you replace it with slate. The fences can't be any higher than 42 inches, and they have to be a picket or chain link. All the woodwork has to be white, things of that nature, even to the type of doors that are allowed to be used in that community that are part of the covenants and restrictions. Rogers Forge is similar. Rogers Forge did get rid of the slate requirement, but they have a certain shingle that you have to use in place of the slate. And there's many others, I'm sure, around that are like that. And there's probably some out here in Carroll County and even Howard County that may have that. Make sure you ask those questions. It is the buyer's, in this case, the buyer's responsibility to inquire. It's right in the contract. It is their responsibility to inquire, but you as an agent, being familiar with your market would probably be the one to know it.
Thanks, George. Let me ask you this, your thoughts on this. So in that case, and there are some in Anne Arundel too that I'm aware of. Wouldn't it be that the seller, wouldn't they still be required to provide, there's not a resale packet. Well, no, there's not a resale package. Like
No.
to provide at least the covenants and restrictions, but it's not under the same law as the resale package.
Yeah, that's the problem you run into, Sean. It's not. There's nothing there, and there are some sellers in there that don't really realize it. And I'm going to give you one quick example. I lived in Academy Heights for 17 years, and I was part of what we call the architectural committee. And somebody added a deck on the back of their house, and it was an end of group townhome, and the deck extended beyond the side of the house. It was a very expensive deck. It was all PVC type of material. As a representative of the association, we had to go around and enforce the covenants and restrictions and tell them they had to reduce the size of that deck. After they spent about probably $20-some thousand putting it up, they had to take and cut off about 4 foot of the deck to meet and comply with the covenants and restrictions. And their first words out of their mouth was, "Nobody told us about it." And we had to provide them with a copy of the covenants and restrictions, which I always carried with me at the time. Some of those locations, Rogers Forge may be one of them, Academy Heights, you can go to their websites and they actually have the covenants and restrictions on their websites.
I've seen a lot of agents in the Rogers Forge area put that in their agent remarks so that people know upfront to click on this link so that you can get the various restrictions that apply to Rogers Forge.
Right. Okay.
And Guilford has some oddball things as well, so people are
Yeah, there you go. Guilford's another one. I forgot all about that one.
Wayne
Guilford,
asked-
however, is required. Guilford is not voluntary.
Okay. So
Guilford's required.
it's a required HOA?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. But there are odd things in there, so.
And some people just assume because the home was built, they're assuming HOAs didn't exist back, before the 1960s, and they very well did. It's uniformity. That's what it was all about.
And Wayne asked a question, if these are noted in the deeds. I think the answer, Wayne, is not always. I'm trying to think, like in Anne Arundel County, the one that I'm familiar with is Herondale. It's a little community of little ranchers that were built in the 50s, and it's not mandatory, but they're there. And that's a whole nother class, because
Yeah, I know.
yeah, like you said, George, if the seller knows and is an agent, then you can put that in your remarks or put it in your documents in bright. But if they don't know.
Yeah. I tell you who brought it up. It's Amy Smith from Lakeside. She's the one that brought it up at our meeting the other day. She brought it up and was talking a little bit about it to me. And I sometimes these things, you don't think that it's that important to mention it to people, but it is.
Did Amy have a good solution? Okay. That's not one I can come up with a clear answer
No,
on.
it's just ask questions, but
Yeah.
you will still run into sellers that don't know.
Yeah.
Because it was never told to them when they bought.
Right, and they never put a deck up, so they were
Yeah.
never challenged, and it's not non-disclosure, it's just didn't know.
And it can make somebody very, very angry. I was wondering if this guy was going to, shoot me or something after we went there. And we had another case where somebody had just purchased the home, and they were going to replace the roof, and we walk by and there's this big truck there unloading asphalt shingle
Mm-mm.
and asked them what they were doing. So we're replacing the roof. Not with that, you're going to. And that,
Thankfully, you caught him before.
yes.
Wow. Okay,
Anything else anybody wants to talk about? We're open for discussion, even though we're right at an hour and 5 minutes. But anything else? Anything you guys that's come up during any challenges you've been faced with other than getting the darn offers accepted? No? Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We had a good attendance today. We had 30 people show up. I want to thank you. This is always, good to have this number of people show up. We all learned something. None of us know it all. We all learned something from this. So it's the more we learn, the better we are. Okay. And with that, ta-da.
thank you,
Bye.
George.
Guys,
Thank
great
you,
job.
everybody.
Thank you.
Guys,
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, thank
Yeah,
you.
Have a good week.
bye-bye.